When periodically the great and the good of the church gather to compile new lectionaries, new lists of readings for the various Sundays during the year, it's always an exercise in terms of what they've included, what they've missed out, but seemingly a common fault is that when they come to Isaiah 53, that passage that Jean read for us, invariably the first verse is ignored. We tend to launch in with verse 2 and the image of growing up like a tender shoot, rather than what appears in a way to be the beginnings of the passage that invites us to consider the significance of what is to follow. In this servant song, these words written to speak, it would seem, to the Jews in exile in Babylon, to offer some words of encouragement, because their whole understanding of themselves, of their religion, has been brought low by the reality they've experienced. And here are some words of hope and possibility that's intended to help them through that journey. And we look at them and we see they have this messianic tint, as the servant who is the focus of the songs appears to be the Jesus who comes. And so as we listen to these words and see how they resonate with the story of Jesus as we understand it, they remind us that these prophets of long ago spoke with great wisdom of the one who was to come, who in a way encouraged the Jews and indeed encourage us to look anew at what the Old Testament has to say and how it invites us to sense something more of the reality of how Jesus is not just a man of a particular time, but he spans the entirety of history, stretching back to the dawn of creation and going forward to when the world will ultimately come to its end and Christ, in whatever way it happens, will return. And these words and the first verse invite us to contemplate the significance. This is how the New International Version renders that first verse of Isaiah 53. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? As if Isaiah is saying, listen to what's going to follow and see what you make of it. Watch out for the signs that will mean that God is on the move. Firstly, there's words here about what we might call appearance. For reasons best known to them, the people in my impending patch have asked for a photograph of me so they can put it on the church website and frighten people or whatever it may be. And it's an interesting thing because they've got this photo and it's that case people might look at it and what goes through their mind when they see me, who doesn't like having his photograph taken, struggling to appear normal for the camera as Louise was taking it. What preconceptions they will come to simply because of what I look like. You know, we look at things and we react. It's part of human nature in a way. No photographs in Isaiah's day, but these words in a way are intended as a snapshot for us to listen and to take note. And he begins by delivering an image of how this servant, the Messiah, is going to appear. And he tells us three things about this appearance: that it's fragile, that it's ordinary, and that he will be despised. And the really interesting thing, I think, is that the first of those is all about frailty. And why does that come first? It leads in a way into the ordinariness, but this fragility, this frailty, seemingly is of huge significance. Hence the image of this tender shoot growing out of parched ground, which almost suggests there is a limited chance of survival. It speaks, I suppose, in a way, of the essential humanity of the servant, that he is like all of us. And we need to remind ourselves of that. And that then leads into the pictures of his ordinariness. Nothing that made him stand apart, looking in a sense like a normal member of society. But for whatever reason, this fragile, ordinary individual was held in such low esteem, not worthy of note. And then we can look forward and remind ourselves of the impoverished birth that we will celebrate. That when Jesus was born, particularly after the arrival of the Magi, the so-called wise men, his life expectancy took a tumble because Herod was intent on rooting him out and disposing of him. The family had to flee into Egypt. There was always the chance that these refugees were going to be caught and Herod have his way with them. This ordinary, seemingly dull reality having a luster that makes people look and see. The one who was ignored, rejected, becoming something of great beauty and significance. Almost as if we can stand here and ask the question, what was God playing at? Why was he seemingly so foolish? Why not a king come in a splendid setting with great charisma, something about him that made him stand apart from the crowd? Why not take the obvious route? But 450, 500 and some years earlier, 550 years earlier, this image of this ordinary, weak person, threatened, rejected. And I suppose it says to us, as we look back to this story of humble origins, these horrendous early days of Christ, how does it challenge our view of Jesus? How does it invite us to reshape the image and look anew? And then secondly, there's something here about story. You know what it's like. You go to find a book to read, and if you're like me, you pull it off the shelf and you read the blurb on the back that gives you an idea of what's going to happen when you read it. And it's almost like this particular passage, to me at least, is like the blurb for the New Testament. It's delivering this great image of Jesus who is to come and inviting us to listen and take note so that we can then read the New Testament with even greater understanding, and it can build our picture of hope. Because that's what we need. I've just started reading John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, which is set in the Dust Bowl of America amongst an impoverished people. It's part social commentary, part a story. And it's the key image is the grandfather in the Joad family who talks about going to California where they're going to try and escape from Oklahoma to this land where orange tree grows and where his hope is he'll be able to pick a bunch of grapes off the tree and squash them over his face so the grape juice will run into his mouth. But when they're due to go, he turns up and says, I'm not coming. I'm going to stay here in this place where I've lived all my life. I don't want to come to this new life in California. And they have to trick him to encourage him to travel with them. I suppose his thought was the journey would be difficult. And we need to remind ourselves that part of this story is this journey that was difficult. Hebrews reminds us of the Jesus who was tempted as we are, yet without sin. And we know how hard temptation can be. But Isaiah paints a stronger picture, a brutal picture. All sorts of words and images that, in a sense, should make us quake when he talks about how the servant is going to be stricken, afflicted, punished, pierced, crushed. It's not a nice and pleasant image, but he delivers it to point to what is going to be. And remind us that the story we celebrate at Christmas is in one sense quite quaint and cute and a baby being born, but it's surrounded by all these things that show something of the folly of humanity, and that the Jesus story as it progresses is in part a story of God's grace, God's wonder, but alongside that is the side theme of human folly and the inability of humanity to see what would be good for it and to cling to those things that in a sense aren't working, that are not succeeding. There is in the image that Isaiah offers to us something of a bleak darkness, a shadow cast by the injustice meted out on the servant. It reminds us that the story of which we are part is not an easy one. That the life that Jesus lived was not straightforward. And at various points, it came close to being worse than we could imagine. That hope is there in the midst of barbarism. The picture that Isaiah paints is of the servant striving to be different, striving to invite a new way, and humanity battling against that. And so I suppose it invites us to think about how we stand in the way of God. What there is about us that prevents the outworking of his grace. And how we can take hold of something of what Christ offers to us to defeat the strains of our humanity and help us to become pictures of love and grace. For here, ultimately in the passage from Isaiah, is a great image of hope. History is really there to encourage us to learn lessons from the past. And I suppose we remind ourselves that we don't always do that. In Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, and now in Spain, apparently, there is a growing right-wing movement looking back to the people like Franco and Hitler and trying to draw some inspiration from them. And that's a worrying thing. We see it too in America with Donald Trump deciding on a more isolationist view where he holds the world at bay, which in a way is worrying. We see it in the joys of the Brexit debacle being worked out in our midst, and what's going to happen when Parliament and government clash and coincide, and Parliament holds government to be in contempt of it. History, in a sense, is the story of lessons not learnt. Writ large, in a way, is the demise of the good, the prophetic, the visionary, the faithful, who suffer because of human stupidity. The reason that there is a barbaric act at the heart of our faith is because of human beings such as you and I, who insisted on putting Jesus to death. But Isaiah, somehow writing all those years in advance, reminds us that there is hope. That the Jesus who came offers us something the world does not. There is talk of justification, of making us clean from where we've gone wrong. There is talk of great hope of our being able to see and understand more of God. There is talk of solidarity, of the servant who comes alongside us and meets us in our deepest need. So that we can then jump forward to that beautiful little passage from Hebrews, where the image of the high priest is, in a way, radically changed. Because rather than being this austere figure who controlled Judaism, suddenly it is a high priest who understands what we are going through, who knows the reality of the experience of the ordinary people, who comes to move alongside the poor and the disadvantaged, to give them images of hope, some of which we've sung earlier this morning. It is a fantastic image that Isaiah delivers, that in a way says to us, hope is going to come, that points us to the cross and says to us, yes, you can argue about what happened there. You can postulate your theories of atonement as to what Jesus achieved, but the reality is that the cross is a victory of love. You can spend your life trying to interpret what that means, but the key important thing is it is a victory of love in the midst of the darkness that humanity creates. That the prophetic voices point to this victory of hope and invite us to approach the throne of God, to receive mercy and grace, to embrace a new form of humanity that Jesus invites us to accept. Isaiah says, "Who has believed our message, or to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed?" Next week, we will think, I suppose, about what this means for us. But now, the key point is reminding ourselves that we are intimately connected to this great story that speaks of how frailty gains victory, how out of bleakness hope emerges, how out of the depths of despair love gains a great victory. This is Isaiah saying, this is the one who is going to come. This is the one who's going to turn the world upside down. This is the one who will change the lives of God's people. Watch out for him, Isaiah says. And thereby he reminds us, as we seek to interact with the world, as we seek to encourage the world to understand what Christmas is all about, to remind ourselves that the Old Testament says, this is how it's going to be. Men and women long, long before saying, this is who the Messiah is going to be. This is what's going to take place. And therefore that's part of what we have to offer to the world. Not that we just look at an isolated event in Bethlehem and draw hope from that. But we see that event as intimately connected with what's gone before, what follows afterwards, that speaks of the reality of God's care and love for us and for all that he has created. What does Advent mean to you? I hope it's not just about trying to buy presents and send cards and all those important things. I hope it's about reminding ourselves that the child of Bethlehem stable was the fulfillment of great promises. And when we look to those promises and distill their wisdom, we hear God's message that says how in the darkness of life, light can come. And if we allow ourselves to sample that light, then we will be privileged to share something of the victory of God's love. Amen.